Hey, on today's episode of the Riderflex podcast, I want to tell you about the fake wedding. I had an employee make up a story about getting married and having a wedding, believe it or not. Great story. I want to tell you what I learned from it. And really, the point of the episode is supporting employees with mental health issues and what you can do to support and help them and, you know, get them to be able to continue to work for you, et cetera. Anyway, let me give you this story. It's pretty good. So I had this young man, we'll call him Johnny. He worked for me. I was a store manager in retail, music retail, back in the 90s. This guy, Johnny, he was a key holder for me, right? For those of you that come from retail, you recognize the term key holder. They had keys to the store they could open and close, et cetera. He wasn't an assistant manager, but he was like a lead or whatever. Great employee. No problems with him really whatsoever. Super buttoned up kid, respectful, always overdressed. I mean, he kind of looked like a banker to a certain degree. I mean, just a great young man. Never had any problems with him whatsoever. Anyway, he had always told us about his girlfriend and how he loved his girlfriend and blah, blah, blah. And he would often talk about her. I never saw her. She never came into the store, but, he would always just talk about his relationship, just small talk. Well, he told the crew, he's like, hey, I'm getting married, And so we're all like, oh, it's, congratulations, when's the date, et cetera. Over the next few months, he's planning out the wedding and talking to the crew about the wedding. And I schedule around it. I my store is open every day as a retail manager. I think the wedding was on a Saturday. Several of the girls that worked for me wanted to go to the wedding for Johnny. And so what I did was I worked that day and gave several people off, including him. So I got the schedule worked out. Not everybody could be there, but so several of my employees were going to go. So Saturday comes, the day of the wedding comes. And I get a call from one of the girls at the store. We'll call her Mary. Mary calls and she's like, hey, I can't find this address where this church is. There's no church at this address. Like, I must have the wrong address. She calls me. I'm like, well, that's the address I have for the event. Are you sure? Blah, blah, blah. She's like, I can't find it. And so now keep in mind, this is before cell phones, right? And so I called his dad's house. Somehow I had his dad's number. Either he lived there or whatever. I can't remember, but somehow I got a hold of his dad. His dad calls me back at the store. And I told him, Mr. Brown, no, that wasn't his name. I was like, hey, Mr. Brown, Mary's trying to find the wedding. Can't get a hold of Johnny. She must have the wrong address. And there's this long pause from Mr. Brown on the phone. I said, Mr. Brown, I'm trying to find the wedding. He's not saying anything. And finally, I can hear this kind of, this deep sigh in his voice. And he says, Steve, he says, were you told that there was a wedding? And I said, yeah, the wedding for Johnny. He's like, listen, there's no wedding. He goes, there's no wedding. There's no girlfriend. And I was like, huh? What are you talking about? Anyway, he goes on to tell me, very passionately about his son's problem. his mental problems and challenges that his son has. His son, I can't remember how he was diagnosed, but what happens is he makes up stories. And then when he makes up a little story, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then he lies about it and then he doesn't know how to get out of it. And apparently this was a thing that had been going on most of his life, as a teenager on into being a young man. This is some sort of problem he has. He gets better, he takes his medication, then he stops taking his medication. When he stops taking his medication, he starts lying and starts making up stories. And then he feels bad because he lied. So then the lie continues and it just gets bigger and then he doesn't know how to get out of it. This is a pattern that his dad explained to me that happens. And I'm like, wow. Okay. So you're telling me that there's no girlfriend. Johnny's not getting married. Like, holy cow. He's like, I said, I got people driving around trying to find a wedding. He's like, yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Because, anyway, I was blown away by it. I get a hold of everybody eventually. And, a few days go by. I can't remember exactly how long, but I told his dad, I was like, well, listen, Johnny's a great employee. This is crazy that this happened, but, have him come in and talk to me. So Johnny comes in and he tells me, and Johnny just says, look, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I got this problem. I don't mean to hurt anybody. Please don't fire me. All this thing. So I kept him. I didn't let him go. I did remove him from being a key holder. I told him, I said, look, I don't think I can have you going to the bank and making deposits and dealing with cash and opening and closing the store, but you can stay on as an employee here. So I put him in a different position. So what's the point of all this, right? The point of the story is if you have an employee with mental health issues, you don't have to fire them, right? Like try to put them in a different position, see what you can do to help them. What I learned from it is this, don't overreact. Find out why and all the reasons before reacting, which I did a decent job of. So often on the podcast, I tell you about how I screwed things up early on, but this one I actually handled pretty well. Find out why before reacting, then have an open and honest conversation with the person, the employee, and maybe a family member if you can, right? Just have an honest conversation, talk about the problem, what they're going through, and all of it. Gather information, and then move them into a position that makes sense. Maybe it's different types of responsibility, maybe based on whatever problem they have. They can't, I don't know, be in charge of security or be in charge of cash or something, right? Like move them into a spot that if they mess up again, you're protecting company assets. And then the final thing I learned that I would recommend is do regular check-ins. Just, sit down with them periodically and say, hey, how's it going? How you doing? How are things? Have you had any problems? And just check with them. So anyway, Johnny went on to work for me the rest of the time that I was at that store. Matter of fact, I think he was an employee for me for another year or two. I can't remember exactly how long. And before I went on and got promoted to another district or store, lost track of him after that. Don't know what happened to him, but he stayed on as a productive member of the crew. And there is your Riderflex tip of the day.